I was still standing when he said it. The conference room smelled like burnt coffee and lemon disinfectant, and my manager didn't even lower his voice. "I reassigned your bonus," he said, tapping his pen against the table like he was conducting an orchestra. "You don't really need it." The room went quiet. Not awkward quiet. Dangerous quiet. I felt my face heat, my jaw lock. Everyone else stared at the notepad in front of them like eye contact might get them dragged into whatever this was becoming. I didn't blink. I didn't speak. But inside my chest something split clean in half. He leaned back in his chair, casual and comfortable, like he'd just announced the weather forecast instead of stealing $8,500 from my pocket. "Evan could really use the money," Trevor continued, gesturing toward his friend across the table. "You've got a husband. A house. You're fine." Evan sat there not meeting my eyes, his face flushed red, fingers drumming nervously against his notepad. My bonus. The one I earned. The one HR had already confirmed in writing 2 weeks ago. Given away like it was spare change he found in his coat pocket. I felt my fingers curl into my palm, nails biting into skin. And that's when I realized something that changed everything. This wasn't a mistake. This was a decision. A calculated, deliberate choice to humiliate me in front of my colleagues and take what was mine. My name is Mallory Reed and I am a white 38, raised middle class in suburban Ohio, taught to work hard and not complain. I've spent 8 years in operations at Hartfield Logistics, a mid-sized shipping and distribution firm, the kind of place that prides itself on being like a family. The kind of place where families protect their own. I forced a small nod, keeping my voice steady despite the rage building in my throat. "Understood." Trevor smiled at me, that self-satisfied grin that made my stomach turn. That smile would cost him everything. I gathered my notepad and pen, stood up from the conference table and walked out with my head high. My legs felt like they might give out, but I kept moving, one foot in front of the other, until I reached my desk. I didn't cry in the bathroom. I didn't slam my laptop shut or storm into HR. I didn't confront Trevor or demand an explanation in front of everyone. I went back to my desk and opened the spreadsheet I'd been working on before the meeting, quarterly performance metrics tied directly to bonus allocations. And that's when I noticed something I hadn't paid attention to before. A column that didn't add up correctly. The numbers were there, formatted properly, color-coded by department. But when I looked closer at the formulas, something felt fundamentally wrong about the whole structure. Evan's performance ratings were exactly 2 points higher than mine across every single category. Not 3 points. Not 1 point. Exactly 2. That kind of precision doesn't happen naturally in performance reviews. I scrolled through the previous quarter's data, my heart starting to pound in my chest. Same pattern. Evan's scores were consistently 2 points higher than mine in every metric, like someone had applied a formula rather than conducting actual evaluations. Customer satisfaction, me 87, him 89. Project completion, me 93, him 95. Team collaboration, me 91, him 93. The pattern repeated for 6 straight quarters without deviation. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen, my mind racing through possibilities and implications. Trevor had been my manager for 3 years. In that time I'd learned to read his patterns, understand his methods, anticipate his moves. He was methodical about covering his tracks, always leaving just enough documentation to seem legitimate. But numbers don't lie the way people do. I saved 3 copies of the spreadsheet immediately. One to my personal cloud drive. One to a USB stick I kept in my purse. One emailed to my personal account with a timestamp in the subject line. I told myself I was just being careful, protecting my work in case something happened to the company servers. But deep down I knew what I was really doing. I had just found my first thread. And threads, when pulled correctly, unravel entire tapestries. I stayed late that night, long after everyone else had gone home. The office was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioning and the occasional settling creak of the building. I pulled up expense reports from the past 18 months, sorting by approver. Trevor's name appeared on hundreds of transactions, which made sense given his role as operations manager. But certain vendors appeared repeatedly with unusual frequency. Small amounts, nothing that would trigger automatic review by accounting. But when I started adding them together, they painted an interesting picture that didn't match our actual business needs. Consulting fees to a company called Apex Solutions Group. Equipment purchases from Pinnacle Office Systems. Training sessions billed by Summit Professional Development. I'd never heard of any of these vendors and I'd been working in operations for 8 years. I opened a new browser tab and searched for Apex Solutions Group. No website. No company page anywhere online. No trace of them anywhere except for a business registration filed 14 months ago in Delaware. Pinnacle Office Systems had a bare-bones website that looked like it was built in 2005, listing a P.O. box as their address and a phone number with a voicemail that never got returned when I tried calling. Summit Professional Development didn't exist at all outside of our vendor database. Each transaction was just under $5,000, the threshold that required secondary approval from the finance department. That's not luck. That's strategy. I created a separate document on my personal laptop, listing dates, amounts, vendor names, and approval signatures. Then I cross-referenced everything with our actual inventory logs and service records. Gaps everywhere. We supposedly purchased 15 laptops from Pinnacle in March. Our inventory showed we received 8. We paid for leadership training from Summit in June. Nobody I asked remembered attending any training that month. My hands were shaking by midnight, but not from fear. From the sick thrill of knowing I was right about something being fundamentally wrong here. Trevor wasn't just playing favorites with bonuses and performance reviews. He was stealing from the company. And Evan, sitting there in that conference room looking guilty, avoiding my eyes while Trevor announced he was taking my bonus, Evan knew something. They both knew. I saved everything, backed it up to 3 different locations, then finally drove home through empty streets, my mind spinning through possibilities and implications. I barely slept that night. When I did, I dreamed about spreadsheets with numbers that moved and changed every time I tried to read them, mocking my attempts to find the truth. The next morning, I arrived at work early before most people and went straight to my desk. I pulled up the vendor management system and started digging deeper into the registration records. Apex Solutions Group had been added to our approved vendor list 14 months ago. The person who submitted the vendor registration form, Trevor Kimball. The person who approved adding them to the system, Trevor Kimball. The person who approved every single invoice from them, Trevor Kimball. It was a closed loop, a perfect circle with no oversight, no secondary approval, no audit trail beyond what Trevor himself created. I printed everything, created a detailed timeline, highlighted the patterns in yellow and the red flags in pink. Then I did something that felt risky but necessary. I requested access to the previous fiscal year's financial records, citing a benchmarking project I was supposedly working on to improve our quarterly forecasting methods. Trevor approved my request within an hour, probably not even reading it carefully, just clicking approve like he did for everything else. He didn't know I was building a cage around him, one document at a time, one transaction at a time. And the beautiful thing about evidence is that it doesn't need to be dramatic or explosive. It just needs to be true, documented, and impossible to deny when examined by the right people. Over the next few days, Trevor started watching me more closely. I could feel his attention like a weight between my shoulder blades whenever I was in the office. He found reasons to walk past my desk that he'd never had before. He asked questions about projects he'd never cared about in 3 years. He checked in on deadlines that weren't due for weeks. One afternoon he stopped by my desk with coffee in hand, leaning against the cubicle wall in that casual way that was supposed to look friendly. "You okay, Mallory?" he asked, fake concern dripping from every syllable. "You've seemed a little off since the bonus announcement." "I'm great," I said, keeping my voice light and professional. "Just cleaning up some reporting inconsistencies before quarter end." His eyes flicked to my screen. I smiled and minimized the window, pulling up a harmless email about supply chain logistics instead. "Nothing major," I added. "You know how messy the data gets this time of year." He nodded slowly, but I could see the calculation in his eyes, trying to figure out what I was actually working on. "Right. Well, let me know if you need anything." "Will do, thanks." He walked away, but not before glancing back twice over his shoulder. That was the moment I knew for certain he was watching me, wondering what I knew, trying to figure out if I was a threat. Let him wonder. Let him worry. Because the thing about guilty people is they always assume you know more than you do, and that paranoia makes them sloppy. By the end of the week, Trevor had stopped by my desk 6 times, each visit with a thinner excuse than the last. I kept my expression neutral, my tone professional, my screen angled away from the aisle where people walked past. Meanwhile, Evan had started avoiding me completely. Not obviously. Not dramatically. But I noticed the way he took the long route to the break room to avoid passing my desk. The way he wouldn't sit near me in meetings anymore, always finding a seat on the opposite side of the table. The way he stopped making small talk about his weekend plans or asking about my husband. Guilt has a smell. It's sharp and metallic and unmistakable once you learn to recognize it. I watched him one afternoon hunched over his keyboard, glancing toward Trevor's office every few minutes like a nervous dog waiting for its owner. That's when I fully understood their dynamic. Trevor wasn't just Evan's manager or his friend. He was Evan's protector, his benefactor, the person who made things happen that Evan couldn't accomplish on his own merit. And Evan, mediocre and insecure, was willing to look the other way and keep his mouth shut about whatever he knew or suspected. Maybe he knew about the fake vendors and the stolen money. Maybe he just knew about the bonus theft and figured that was the extent of it, that Trevor was just playing favorites and bending rules. Either way, he was complicit. Either way, he'd chosen his side. I kept my distance from both of them, stayed professional and cordial, smiled when necessary. But I made a mental note that when this whole situation finally unraveled, Evan wouldn't be collateral damage. He'd be evidence. 2 weeks after the bonus announcement, I submitted a formal request through the proper channels for a routine internal audit. Nothing dramatic or accusatory. Just a standard compliance review, the kind of thing we were supposed to do every 18 months anyway, though we were slightly overdue. I submitted the request on a Tuesday morning, citing fiscal year-end reconciliation and the upcoming budget cycle as justification. I kept the language neutral and professional, framing it as due diligence rather than suspicion. Trevor approved it the same day. He signed off on the audit request without hesitation, even adding a note about how it was good timing and he appreciated my initiative in keeping us compliant. I stared at his approval email for a long time trying to understand his thinking. Either he was confident his tracks were covered well enough to withstand scrutiny, or he didn't realize what I'd actually asked for. The audit I requested wasn't the standard surface-level review that most departments went through. I'd specifically asked for a deep dive into vendor relationships, expense allocations and performance-based compensation, areas that would require pulling detailed transaction records, verifying vendor legitimacy and cross-referencing approval workflows. Trevor had approved it anyway, probably not reading the specifics carefully enough. Arrogance or ignorance, I wasn't sure which. But either way, he'd just given me official permission to dismantle everything he'd built. The audit team was scheduled to arrive in 2 weeks. I had 14 days to make sure they knew exactly where to look without being so obvious that Trevor would catch on and start destroying evidence. I didn't sleep much during those 2 weeks. Not because I was anxious, I was past that stage now. Because I was meticulous, obsessive, checking and rechecking every detail. Every night after everyone else left the office, I stayed late, cross-referencing records, building timelines, ensuring every piece of evidence pointed exactly where it needed to point. I created what I called a supplementary document, not officially part of my role but framed as helpful background information for the auditors. It outlined our normal procurement processes, flagged unusual patterns I'd noticed while doing my regular work, and asked innocent-sounding questions about specific transactions that didn't quite make sense. Nothing accusatory. Nothing that screamed, "I think my manager is stealing." Just thorough, detailed observations from someone who paid attention to numbers and processes. The kind of document that would make an experienced auditor pause and say, "Wait, let me look at that more closely." I also started keeping a detailed journal of Trevor's behavior, documenting dates, times, and conversations. The way he checked in on my work more frequently than usual. The specific questions he asked about what projects I was working on. The way his eyes lingered on my screen when he walked past. But before I continue with what happened next, if you are enjoying this story, please like and subscribe. The day he casually asked if I'd heard anything about the upcoming audit, trying to sound like he was just making conversation. "Just that it's routine," I said, not looking up from my keyboard. "Why do you ask?" "No reason," he replied quickly. "Just making sure we're prepared, that's all." His smile didn't reach his eyes. I smiled back, warm and oblivious, like I had no idea what I was really preparing for. Inside, I was counting down the days. The auditors arrived on a Monday morning in early November, 2 weeks after I'd submitted my request. 2 women with professional demeanor and calm eyes that missed absolutely nothing. Brianna was tall, probably mid-40s, with reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck and a leather portfolio that looked expensive. Teresa was younger, early 30s, carrying a laptop bag that looked like it weighed 20 pounds and contained everything she'd need for a deep investigation. Trevor played the perfect host immediately, greeting them at reception with his most charming smile. "Welcome to Hartfield," he said, shaking their hands. "Anything you need, just let me know. We're an open book here, completely transparent." I watched him from my desk, the way you watch someone step onto thin ice, curious to see when and how it would crack beneath their weight. The auditors set up in a conference room down the hall. Trevor gave them access to the financial systems, showed them where everything was stored, then returned to his office with his door open, projecting ease and confidence. I waited until Tuesday afternoon before making my move. I stopped by the conference room during a moment when both auditors were there, knocked lightly on the doorframe. "Sorry to interrupt," I said. "I'm Mallory Reed, I work in operations. I put together some background documentation on our vendor processes and approval workflows. Would that be helpful for your review?" Brianna looked up from her laptop, adjusting her glasses. "Absolutely, that would be very helpful." I handed her the folder I'd prepared, 40 pages of analysis, timelines, transaction summaries, and highlighted inconsistencies. "This is very thorough," Teresa said, flipping through the pages, her eyes widening slightly as she scanned the contents. "You put a lot of work into this." "I like things organized," I replied with a modest smile. "I figured it might save you some time." Brianna's eyes met mine for just a moment and something passed between us. Understanding. Recognition. She knew exactly what I was really giving her. Not background information. A roadmap. "Thank you, Mallory," she said. "This will be very useful." I nodded and left, my heart pounding but my expression calm. By Wednesday morning, I noticed the shift in atmosphere. The auditors weren't just reviewing records anymore, going through the motions of a routine compliance check. They were digging. Brianna called Trevor into the conference room twice. Both times he emerged looking slightly less confident than when he'd entered, his smile a little more forced, his shoulders a little more tense. By Wednesday afternoon, they'd requested additional documentation, specifically around vendor registration procedures and approval workflows. Trevor provided everything they asked for, but I saw his jaw tighten as he walked past my desk carrying folders. He knew something was wrong now. He just didn't know how wrong or how much they'd already found. I kept my head down, working on legitimate projects, responding to emails, acting like everything was completely normal. But I felt the tension in the office shift and change. Other people noticed it too. The whispered conversations in the break room. The way people avoided walking past the conference room like the area had become contaminated. The nervous energy that comes when auditors are asking uncomfortable questions. Audits make everyone nervous, even people with nothing to hide. But Trevor wasn't just nervous anymore. He was scared. Thursday morning, Teresa stopped by my desk while I was reviewing shipping schedules. "Quick question, Mallory," she said, her voice casual but her eyes sharp. "In your experience here, who usually verifies the bonus adjustments before they're finalized and sent to payroll?" I didn't hesitate, didn't pause to think about my answer. "Trevor," I said. "He has final approval on all performance reviews and compensation adjustments for our department." Her pen paused over her notepad. Just for a second. Then she wrote something down, underlined it twice, and thanked me before walking back to the conference room. I went back to my shipping schedules, hands steady on my keyboard. But my heart was racing, pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The cage was closing. That night I slept better than I had in weeks. Not because I felt safe or relieved, but because I felt ready. The pieces were moving exactly as they needed to move. The auditors had found the threads I'd carefully left for them, and now they were pulling, unraveling everything Trevor had built over 3 years. I dreamed about standing in that conference room again, hearing Trevor say I didn't need the bonus, watching him smile like he'd done me a favor. But this time when he smiled, his teeth were transparent like glass and I could see right through him. I woke up at dawn feeling clear-headed and calm. Whatever came next, I'd done everything I could possibly do. The truth was documented in multiple locations. The evidence was preserved and backed up. And Trevor had built his own cage, one decision at a time, one fraudulent transaction at a time. I'd just given the auditors the key to open it. Friday would tell me if I'd been right about everything. I got to work early, made coffee in the break room, responded to routine emails. Acted like it was any other ordinary day. Trevor arrived at 9, later than usual. He looked tired with shadows under his eyes. His shirt was wrinkled like he'd pulled it from the laundry basket that morning. He didn't stop by my desk. Didn't make small talk or check on my projects. Just went straight to his office and closed the door, something he rarely did. Through the glass window I could see him on the phone, his body language tense and defensive. The following Friday, exactly 1 week after the audit team had packed up and left, Trevor called me into his office. "Close the door," he said. His voice was flat, controlled, but I could hear the tension underneath. I closed the door and stood there, not sitting down, waiting. He didn't invite me to sit. "You've been very visible lately," he said, fingers drumming on his desk in a nervous pattern. "Working late, asking questions, suddenly interested in processes you've never cared about before." I tilted my head slightly, keeping my expression neutral. "Is that a problem?" "Just an observation." "I've been doing my job," I said calmly. "Same as always." He studied me for a long moment, his eyes searching my face for something, some sign of what I knew or what I'd done. "The audit," he said finally. "Did you have anything to do with requesting that?" "It was due anyway," I replied. "I just formalized the request through proper channels." "Interesting timing." I met his eyes directly, not backing down. "Is there something specific you want to ask me, Trevor?" His jaw tightened, muscles working beneath his skin. "No. That'll be all." I nodded and turned to leave, my hand on the door handle. "Mallory." I paused, looking back at him. "We're a team here," he said, his voice carrying a warning edge. "You remember that, right?" I smiled, cold and professional. "Of course." But his hands were shaking when he picked up his coffee cup, and we both knew what that conversation had really been about. I walked back to my desk feeling lighter than I had in months. Because that conversation told me everything I needed to know. He suspected that I was behind the audit. But he didn't know for certain what I'd found or what I'd told them. And that uncertainty was eating him alive from the inside out. The official audit report came back in stages over the next 2 weeks. First came an email to Trevor flagging preliminary discrepancies in vendor payments and approval workflows. The email was copied to the CFO and the head of HR. Then came the patterns, documented in a follow-up report that outlined systematic irregularities over a 3-year period. Then came the intent, the conclusion that these weren't accidents or oversights but deliberate actions designed to defraud the company. A meeting was scheduled, Trevor with the CFO and the head of HR. Door closed, voices low but urgent through the walls. It lasted 3 hours. When Trevor finally emerged, his face was pale, his expression blank. The email went out Thursday morning at 10:15. Brief, professional, no details. Effective immediately, Trevor Kimball has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Mallory Reed will serve as interim operations manager during this transition period. Please direct any questions to HR. I read it 3 times, sitting at my desk, my hand completely steady but my heart pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. Evan's desk was empty by lunch. No goodbye email. No announcement. No explanation. His personal belongings were gone, his computer screen dark. Just gone. I walked through the office that afternoon, answering questions from confused colleagues, reassuring the team that everything would continue normally, acting like I hadn't just detonated a bomb underneath everything. But inside I was screaming. Not with joy or triumph. With relief. Pure, overwhelming relief. Because I'd been right. And being right meant I wasn't crazy or vindictive or overreacting. I was just someone who noticed things. Someone who paid attention. Someone who refused to stay silent when something was wrong. The official findings were released internally the following week. I wasn't supposed to see them, they were confidential personnel matters. But the CFO, Patricia Hernandez, called me into her office and showed me anyway. "You should know what you uncovered," she said, sliding the document across her desk. I read through it slowly, taking in every detail. Fraudulent vendor relationships established over a 3-year period. Payments to shell companies that existed only on paper. Systematic inflation of performance metrics for preferred employees, specifically Evan Cooper. Bonus reallocations without proper authorization or documentation. Violation of company compensation policy. Abuse of managerial discretion and approval authority. failure to maintain ethical standards and fiduciary responsibility. And at the bottom in bold text the estimated financial impact. Over $230,000 across 3 years. I felt my breath catch in my throat, my hands gripping the arms of the chair. "This is bigger than I thought," I whispered. Patricia nodded, her expression grave. "Much bigger than anyone realized." Trevor and Evan were running a scheme together. Trevor created fake vendors and approved fraudulent invoices. Evan helped process the payments and kept quiet in exchange for preferential treatment, inflated performance reviews and bonuses he didn't earn. "My bonus," I started. "Was the least of it," she finished. $8,500 is nothing compared to the total. But it's what made you look closely at everything else. And that saved this company a lot more than your bonus amount." I sat back, processing the magnitude of what I'd uncovered. "What happens now?" "Criminal investigation," Patricia said. "Both Trevor and Evan will likely face charges for fraud, embezzlement, possibly more. The company is cooperating fully with law enforcement. And Mallory, we owe you much more than an apology." Trevor was formally terminated 2 days later, the decision unanimous among senior leadership. Evan had already resigned during the investigation, but the company flagged him for potential prosecution anyway, providing all documentation to authorities. The office felt different without them. Lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted off everyone's shoulders. People started talking to me more openly, stopping by my desk to ask questions, thanking me quietly in the break room when no one else was around. "I always knew something was off about Trevor," one coworker admitted. "You're brave for speaking up," another said. I didn't feel brave. I felt tired, exhausted from months of secret investigation and documentation. And vindicated, finally believed instead of dismissed. And angry that it had taken a formal audit to make people believe what some of us had sensed all along. But I also felt something else growing inside me. Purpose. Because this wasn't just about me anymore, wasn't just about my stolen bonus or my manipulated performance reviews. It was about a system that had allowed this to happen in the first place. Trevor hadn't operated in a vacuum. He'd thrived for 3 years because nobody questioned him, nobody verified his decisions, nobody pushed back against his authority. Until someone finally did. Patricia called me back to her office that Friday afternoon. "We're restructuring the operations leadership," she said, getting straight to the point. "And I'd like you to consider a role." I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the words sink in. This was bigger than revenge or justice. This was a chance to rebuild something better. "What kind of role?" "Director of Operations," she said. "Reporting directly to me. You'd oversee process improvements, compliance, vendor management, performance review systems. Everything that failed to catch this situation before it cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars." I opened my eyes, meeting her gaze. "I'm interested." She smiled, genuine and warm. "Good. Because you've already proven you can do the job. You have the attention to detail, the integrity, and the courage to do what's right even when it's difficult." Trevor emailed me that night at 11:30. A long, rambling message that pinged into my personal inbox. Defensive and bitter, jumping from topic to topic without coherence. He said I'd ruined his career over nothing. That I should have come to him privately instead of going behind his back. That if I'd just kept quiet and minded my own business, none of this would have happened. That I didn't need the money anyway, so why did I care so much about $8,000? That I'd destroyed his reputation and his future over a misunderstanding. Every sentence dripped with entitlement, with the fundamental belief that he was the real victim here. That I'd somehow wronged him by noticing what he'd done. I read the email twice, my anger building with each paragraph. Then I forwarded it to HR and the company's legal team with a single line. "For documentation purposes regarding ongoing investigation." And I deleted the original from my inbox without responding. I didn't engage. Didn't defend myself or argue. Because Trevor didn't deserve my energy anymore. He'd already taken enough. Instead, I opened a new document on my laptop and started outlining process improvements for vendor management. Dual approval requirements for all transactions above $1,000. Random quarterly audits of expense reports and vendor relationships. Transparent performance metrics with documented justification for all ratings. Mandatory oversight for compensation adjustments. Changes that would make it significantly harder for the next Trevor to exploit the system. Because there would be a next Trevor somewhere, sometime. There always is. But maybe if I built the right safeguards and implemented the right processes, he wouldn't last 3 years. Maybe someone would notice sooner. Maybe someone would feel safe speaking up. And maybe they wouldn't have to sacrifice their bonus to do it. I accepted the promotion officially the following Monday. Director of Operations, effective immediately. Different office, larger and with a window. Different responsibilities, broader scope and real authority. Different future, one I was building myself. The announcement went out company-wide. We are pleased to announce that Mallory Reed has been promoted to Director of Operations, effective immediately. Mallory has demonstrated exceptional leadership, integrity, and commitment to operational excellence. Please join us in congratulating her. I read the email 3 times, still not quite believing it was real. 8 years I'd worked at this company. 8 years of proving myself, staying late, doing the work nobody else wanted, keeping my head down and following the rules. And it had taken uncovering fraud to finally be seen and recognized. That thought should have made me bitter. Instead, it made me determined. Because now I had the authority to change things from the inside. Now I could build systems that protected people instead of exposing them. Now I could make sure that when someone noticed something wrong, they had a clear path to report it safely. A path that didn't require risking everything. My first week as director, I met with every member of the operations team individually. 23 people, 23 conversations. I asked them what wasn't working in their daily processes. What they'd been afraid to say to Trevor. What they wished someone would fix. And I listened without interrupting, taking notes, asking follow-up questions. Really listened in a way they clearly weren't used to. Because that's what Trevor had never done. The criminal investigation moved slowly through the legal system. Trevor hired an expensive defense attorney who tried to argue that the vendor relationships were legitimate and the performance adjustments were within managerial discretion. Evan cooperated with prosecutors immediately, providing detailed testimony in exchange for a lighter sentence. He confirmed everything: how Trevor had approached him 2 years ago with the scheme, how they'd split the proceeds from the fake invoices, how Trevor had promised him protection and advancement in exchange for silence. I was interviewed twice during the investigation. Once by the company's legal team, once by a detective from the financial crimes unit. Both times I provided the same information calmly and clearly, with documentation to support every single claim. The detective taking my statement looked genuinely impressed when I handed him my organized files. "You kept very good records," he said, flipping through the timeline I'd created. "I'm thorough," I replied simply. He smiled. "That's putting it mildly. This is better documentation than most professional investigators manage." 3 months after the initial audit, the company reached a civil settlement with Trevor. He paid back the stolen funds in full, plus penalties and interest. He agreed to never work in any fiduciary or managerial capacity again. He signed a statement admitting to the fraud and the policy violations. Evan took a plea deal with prosecutors. 2 years probation, community service, restitution payments, and a permanent record. My bonus hit my bank account 4 months after Trevor had given it away. Full amount, $8,500. Retroactive to when it should have been paid. With interest calculated from the original date. Plus a separate payment for the previous 2 years. Adjusted bonuses I should have received based on accurate performance ratings instead of Trevor's deliberately manipulated numbers. The total came to nearly $18,000. I sat in my car in the bank parking lot after work, staring at the deposit confirmation on my phone screen. Not crying, though my eyes burned. Just breathing deeply, letting it sink in. Because this wasn't really about the money, it never had been. It was about being told I didn't matter, that my work wasn't valuable enough. That I should be grateful for whatever scraps I was given. That my needs were less important than someone else's wants. And then proving methodically and irrefutably that I did matter. That my work was valuable and recognized. That I deserved what I earned. I deposited the check, drove back home and made dinner with my husband. We didn't celebrate or make a big deal about it. Just acknowledged that justice had been served, slowly but surely. Because revenge isn't a single dramatic moment. It's a process. And mine was complete. 6 months after Trevor's termination, I heard through former colleagues that he was interviewing for operations management positions at other companies. No offers came through. Every background check came back with questions. Every reference call included careful conversations. Funny how paper trails follow you. How digital records never really disappear. How the internet makes it impossible to completely reinvent yourself and escape your past.